Hi everyone and welcome to today's video where we're going to be looking at Cultural Context in Philadelphia Here I Come by Brian Friel. For the purpose of this video, we're going to be comparing it to The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood and the film Brooklyn by John Crowley. Okay, so we're just going to look at the cultural context. Just before we start, it's good to go back over what you believe the cultural context to be. It's the world of the text they live in, the values and attitudes, the laws, the different rituals, customs and values that people hold within each text. Okay, so we're going to look at Philadelphia Here I Come. We're going to begin with an overview of society. So, set in the fictional town of Ballybeg in rural Donegal in the 1960s. Okay, so you probably know Ballybeg translates to small town, and we all know what happens in a small town. Everybody knows everyone. We know each other's business. You know who your grandparents were. Reputation was based on families. Okay, very important within the text. The central character is Gar O'Donnell, who is 25 years old and lives with his father, S.B. O'Donnell. Okay, so we also get to see Private Gar on stage, which is the conscience or alter ego of Gar Public. Okay, very important device used by Brian Friel in order to find out what was going on in the mind of a 25-year-old Irishman. And it's a big part of the story because we see Gar Public says very little. If we were to take him at face value, shows very little emotion. He doesn't care about going to America. But when we see the Private Gar, we realise that there's a lot going on in there. And Brian Friel was trying to make a point that all Irish men we're going through similar things at this time, but just didn't say. There's a line in towards the end which really sums up Brian Friel's attitude when Gar says, "To hell with strong, silent men." Okay, so he was having a go with the fact that society viewed, especially back then, strong men were those who didn't show emotion. And as we know now, that is not a sign of strength. Hiding and bottling up your feelings is not a sign of strength. Ballybeg is a town where young men find opportunities difficult to come by, where young women are restricted by the expectation to marry well, and the Catholic Church has considerable influence on the lives of the characters. So, straight away, we'll just consider Brooklyn would have been set in roughly the same time period, and I suppose the central character is going through the exact same situation as Gar. Now, we actually follow Eilish as she goes on her journey to Brooklyn, and I suppose we see this widening of the cultural context completely changing as she goes to Brooklyn. But she still had to, she found opportunities difficult to come by. She had to leave, the same as Gar. The other expectation to marry well, I suppose later in the film we see Eilish, the expectation was that she would also marry well when Jim Farrell became a suitor that she could have married. And I suppose if you compare a real good comparison is between Gar and Tony. Tony would have come from a family who weren't rich, but the opportunities that he has as opposed to Gar, where he can marry the woman he loves despite not maybe having the money or the education of Francis King. Okay, so the Catholic Church had considerable influence. Now you'll see a negative, a kind of a negative view of religion in Philadelphia Here I Come, a negative view of religion in The Handmaid's Tale, but you'll see a more positive portrayal of the Catholic Church in Brooklyn, where you see Father Flood do a lot of good things. He helps Eilish along the way. Now you also see the considerable power he has when he's able to pay for Eilish's tuition from a rich parishioner who had a few sins to confess, and his penance seems to have been splashing a bit of cash. Okay, so the role of men and women, a big part of all three texts. Okay, so Philadelphia Here I Come is set in a patriarchal society where women are viewed as second-class citizens. Now, if you were to take it in terms of how severe each of them is, The Handmaid's Tale is obviously the most severe, with women being viewed not just as second-class citizens, nearly viewed as an underclass. Men have complete control in that society. In Brooklyn, we see Eilish has a little bit of autonomy to do what she wants. The fact that she can go back to Brooklyn and be with her husband shows she has power there. In Philadelphia Here I Come, Kate Dugan wants to marry Gar, but can't because he doesn't have the money. And in vice versa. Gar wants to marry Kate Dugan but can't. So the role of men and women, very specific roles. Gar's role is to earn money. The woman's role is to find a husband who can provide for them. So Kate Dugan is under pressure to get married to a suitable man as quickly as possible. Due to the role of the church, parents wanted their daughters married young to avoid the shame of a pregnancy outside of marriage. You'll notice during the flashback that Gar has that they were so eager to get married. He says, I'll bust if I have to wait any longer. And a lot of that pressure is down to the fact that had Kate got pregnant, she may have been sent, and I suppose it ties in with The Handmaid's Tale. In Ireland at that time, she would have possibly been sent to a mother and baby home, which I suppose does link in with The Handmaid's Tale, and we'll talk about that later. Kate also wants Gar to ask her father for permission, another sign of the patriarchal society they live in. Now, that would still happen in today's world, but it's more of a tradition, whereas back then, you could not have got married probably without the father's permission. So Gar must go and ask for permission. So again, you see that the power that Senator Dugan is wielding here by the fact that he can decide whether Gar is allowed to marry Kate or not. Now, we get the impression that when he does go to ask, a lot of students would say, why didn't he just ask? I would get the impression, had he asked, he may have been denied. When Gar goes to ask for her hand, he is stunned by the announcement that Dr. Francis King is in the house and that Senator Dugan is hopeful that he will marry Kate. Note that he does not appear to care about her feelings in this situation. Yeah, it's more about combining the two families. It's nearly forming an alliance like the olden days where you married for strategy and to combine the two families for more power. Okay, so you can see very clear roles here, that a man's role was, a father's role was to arrange suitable marriages for their daughters. Okay, you'll also see that it's not set in stone here. You'll see in The Handmaid's Tale where marriages are arranged. Okay, Eilish, had she not married Tony, there's the entire town, her mother, and basically tried to arrange a marriage for Eilish to Jim Farrell. Okay, and you'll also see Nancy. Nancy marries George Sheridan. She says she loves him, and Eilish says, well, you might love the shop on the square that he's about to come into as well, and she kind of laughs. So you'll see that Kate Dugan and Nancy can be compared quite easily here, because both of them married for basically security and money. Okay. Now, continuing on with that, it is clear that Senator Dugan and his wife have planned Kate's marriage for her and decided who she was going to marry. Kate represents Irish women at that time who were controlled by their parents and expected to marry and live nearby. Yeah, that was a big part of it. They were expected to marry and live nearby. They were expected to provide grandchildren for the grandparents. So she needed money to do that, and she couldn't have earned her own money. Unlike Eilish, who had that little bit of power because she earned her own money. She got educated in Brooklyn. She came back. She had a job waiting for her. Okay, so it's a little bit different in Brooklyn. So you can say it's a little bit different. Whereas in The Handmaid's Tale, women were not expected to work in any shape or form unless it was as a servant to the wives. Okay. Madge also represents how women were expected to work in the home and do feminine chores like cooking and cleaning. Her only other interest is in babies. Is there a sense that she feels isolated by society for not having children? Yeah, and I suppose this links into to The Handmaid's Tale here, the fact that Madge doesn't have children, and you'll notice throughout the text this longing for the child to be called after her. A new Madge, that her legacy would live on, and it would be similar in some ways to the commanders and their wives who can't have children. And you'll also notice Aunt Lizzie in Philadelphia Here I Come can't have children, and she's really down about it, and she's basically she's not trying to adopt Gar, but she's trying to take him in. He's too old for that now, but she's trying to take him in to fill that void. And I suppose in the same way in The Handmaid's Tale that women who were unable to have children brought these handmaids in order to give the family what they wanted. Despite the patriarchal nature of the society, there is huge pressure on men to provide for their families. Kate can't consider marrying Gar unless he has the money to support her and a family. Okay, so Gar earns £3.15 a week, And you'll notice when they go to ask her, Kate's dad, for her hand, she says, you earn £20, you have 5,000 in the bank, and your father's about to retire. So she's telling him he earns 6 times more than he does. He has 20,000 in the bank, which was a phenomenal amount of money at that time. Money beyond Gar's what he would expect to earn or to have, and that his father's about to retire. Okay, you'll also notice a similarity in Brooklyn, where before Elise goes back to Ireland, Tony takes her out to Long Island to show her where he's going to provide for her. That, and you can mention this expectation that men were to provide for the women. Okay, and I suppose in The Handmaid's Tale, it's also quite clear that that is the expectation of men, that they had to provide for the women. Okay, women were not to work or to earn their own money. Okay, men in the text behave in a chauvinistic manner, and their treatment of women is often derogatory. Now, this is very different to Brooklyn, where we see Jim Farrell and Tony who behave in a really, really mannerly way towards women. Okay, so Ned in Philadelphia Come represents this chauvinistic way in which men treat women, and that same attitude can be seen in The Handmaid's Tale when we look at the commander, when he takes Offred out to the brothel, and the way they treat women in that fashion. And he basically said, he shrugged his shoulders and said, we're all human, that this is what men do. Okay, so you'll see it in Ned, the way he talks about the women, and we know it's lies as well. So Ned's aggressive and overly macho persona is obviously designed to hide the hollow nature of life in Ballybeg for men who have no money, no future, and rely on their fathers to sell cows in order to make a bit of money. So a lot of this chauvinism is trying to make themselves feel better, because young men had no opportunities. Ned couldn't buy a present for Gar because, as he said, the bloody old fella didn't sell the cow, and he calls him names because he didn't sell a cow. Ned had no money. He's 25. He's not earning his own money. Ireland was going through a very bleak recession, so young people, especially young men, found themselves in an impossible situation. They couldn't get married because they didn't have money. They couldn't get money because there were no opportunities. So, and in cases like Gar, they had to emigrate. It is clear there are very defined roles in the text for the men and women. So in Brooklyn, the roles aren't as defined. We see Elise working and Rose working throughout. Okay, so they're not as defined. The Handmaid's Tale, they're even more defined. They're set in stone. They can't be. A woman cannot take any powerful roles in society at all. Okay, religion. Religion can be seen across all three texts as well. Okay, the nightly rosary is a symbol of the power of religion within the text. So you can see even how religion is getting into people's homes. That every evening they sit down, they say the Angelas, they do the rosary. Gar is quite critical of Canon Mick O'Byrne, who calls to the O'Donnell house every night to play drafts with SB. Here's a quote from Gar. Because you could translate all this loneliness, this groping, this dreadful bloody buffoonery into Christian terms that will make life bearable for us all, and yet you don't say a word. Now, this is important. I think Brian Friel here is trying to symbolise something else as well. Basically, the canon will definitely have seen the tension between Gar and SB, the fact they're not discussing what's about to happen. This has been going on for years, the tension between them. They don't speak, they don't communicate, and he's basically saying a spiritual advisor like a priest should be able to talk, and he should be able to come in and help them to communicate, but he doesn't say a word. Basically, that the church remains silent. And is Friedel saying something else? Is that a symbol for anything else within the church staying silent? Okay, we had abuse scandals, we had mother and baby homes, we had lots of different things where the church did remain silent. Is Brian Friel highlighting that there? And you can bring that across to The Handmaid's Tale, where all of the things that are happening, the church says nothing, the extremists say nothing, because basically in the Bible, and we'll discuss this in a future video, when they basically use the Bible, even though it doesn't say what they say it does, they use it as basically, we can do what we want. Okay, so the staying silent is important there. You don't say a word. As Gar highlighting the fact the Catholic Church are standing by while mass immigration is happening all over Ireland. Does it hint at how the church did nothing during other controversies? Okay, so And again, when we're talking about religion, it's seen in a negative light in Philadelphia. It's seen in a negative light in The Handmaid's Tale. But if you look at Brooklyn, you will see a positive portrayal of the church when you see on Christmas Day the feeding of the homeless men, or the men who are down and out. The way he treats Eilish, he helps her. Eilish is suffering from homesickness, he helps her. So Canon Mick O'Byrne is the opposite of Father Flood, in that he is a spiritual advisor to Eilish and knows what to do to help her with her homesickness. Gareth also highlights the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church in relation to money. What interest have you in money? Sure, as long as you get to Tenerife for 5 weeks every winter, what interest have you in money? Okay, again, another sarcastic comment from Gar Private about the Catholic Church and their attitude towards money. And I suppose money and power are always interlinked in these texts, and you'll see in The Handmaid's Tale the power that the church can wield, okay? And even in Brooklyn, which I said had a positive portrayal, they can still wield a lot of power, as I've mentioned before, with Father Flood taking the money off the businessman because he had sinned and he went to confession. We see the power of the church clearly illustrated when the canon tries to remove Master Boyle from his job as the local teacher. So, as a lot of people might know, every primary school in Ireland was under the priest. The parish priest was in charge. The church owned the buildings, were in charge of hiring and firing of teachers for a long time, and a kind of conflict of interest there, especially in later years, or in recent years, I suppose, when we had teachers who were coming out as gay, which was against the ethos of the Catholic Church, and there was a conflict of interest in terms of could they be fired for expressing their sexuality. Okay, so these are the kind of things where we see the power, and basically The Handmaid's Tale is a kind of a warning of what could happen if we give religion too much power. And Brian Friel may also be showing how the church is using its power, or misusing its power in many ways. Link this to The Handmaid's Tale, where religion is law, and what happens when religion is given too much power. So Margaret Atwood has said a dystopian novel where religion is all powerful and all conquering, and I suppose we see that what could happen very quickly if we allow people like this. And it's also very, very relevant today, because we see across the world a sort of a right-wing resurgence where people, I suppose we see in the Middle East where Sharia law is in a lot of countries, where if people break religious rules, they can be punished by death. We also see a rise of that across the Western world as well. Even in America, the rise of anti-abortion lobbyists and different things like that. Okay, so we and it's mentioned a few times about people who had abortions in The Handmaid's Tale. So Margaret Atwood was obviously thinking about that as well, and she's talking about the power that religion can have in texts. Okay, so we're moving on now to social class. Again, can be seen across all three texts very, very clearly, and there are characters within each text who are representative of the social class, and it's not by coincidence. The writers have placed these people front and centre to show and to highlight social class. So Senator Dugan typifies the importance of social class in the play. He is a lawyer and a senator, two titles which suggest prosperity and wealth. Now, and it's also important that he's a senator. For those who don't know, the Senates also sit in Leinster House. They're not directly elected by the people. They're elected by those who have graduated from university, from different panels. So that's one thing. So you generally have to be well educated in those days to get elected. The other thing is that you have to remember that SB is a councillor, and a senator would be above a councillor. So it's I suppose if you think of it in terms of a ladder, it's one way to show how Senator Dugan is above SB, because he's more important. His title is superior to SB's, and I don't think that's a coincidence either. The fact that he's a lawyer suggests an education that allowed him to become a lawyer, an education that not everyone would have had, especially in a small town in Donegal, where education wasn't free. Wealth would have had to have played a huge part in that. When discussing Kate marrying Francis King, he tells Gar, "We've known the Kings, since way back. His father and I were class fellows at school." The suggestion is clear. Gar is not part of the elite and therefore not worthy of marrying Kate. Okay, this is also important because it's showing that reputation isn't based on just your own persona. It is based on your family history. Okay, you're judged based on your father, your grandfather. So Gar is very much judged on SB. He's a local councillor. He would be respected, but he's not high up in the hierarchy of social class. Okay, so it's a bit like Jim Farrell and George Sheridan in Brooklyn. They're high up because their parents own shops and pubs, businesses on the square. Okay, so that makes them part of the elite within Irish society. It's very hard to break that down, and if we're looking for a clear comparison, look at the way Mrs. Kelly runs her shop. When Mrs. Brady comes in, she ignores 10 other customers to go to serve her because she believes she is of a higher class. She treats her better based on her class. Okay, and a woman says, "I'm next," and she said, "You still are," and then she admonishes her for having the cheek to order shoe polish on a Sunday. She said, "That's not an item you should be buying on a Sunday." That would never happen in today's world. And you also see social class in The Handmaid's Tale, from the commander and his wife right down. People are dressed differently based on their social class, based on their position within the society. Okay, so Gar is deeply insecure about his place in the social ladder, more so since Kate married Francis King. Honeymoon in Mallorca, and you couldn't have afforded to take her to Malahide. Okay, so some people may not be conscious of their place in the social class. Gar probably was unaware of his position within society or his status until this happened. Now he is deeply conscious of it, and he realises he's comparing himself to Francis King, and he's insecure about that. Okay, and it's a bit like Tony in Brooklyn. Tony is a little bit insecure because of the way he speaks versus the way Ailey speaks. She is much more educated and he's not. She can tie him up in knots with the way she speaks, and there's a bit of insecurity there. He's a plumber. He's a blue collar worker, as it would be known in America, and he's a bit insecure, but he's still it's not as prevalent in America as it would be in Ireland. America is the land of opportunity, as it's portrayed in Brooklyn, that you can, no matter where you come from, that you can rise, you can build upon yourself. As a Gar's ambition is to be the manager of the hotel, and the reality is, had he went to America and worked really hard, he could become someone. Whereas in Ireland, it was very restricted. The chances of rising the social ladder were quite restricted. Okay, and in The Handmaid's Tale, there was no hope of rising in the social ladder. Everything was very, very set. Through the breakup with Kate, Gar realises his place on the social ladder and he becomes aware of the importance of social class in Ballybeg. Okay, the O'Donnell family home is sparsely furnished, which highlights the relatively low status they have in terms of social class within the town of Ballybeg. The kitchen is sparsely and comfortably furnished, a bachelor's kitchen. Okay, this can also be compared to Offred's room, sparsely furnished room in The Handmaid's Tale, which is in contrast to the Victorian house in which the commander and his wife live in. So it's very clear material goods and the way in which a house is looks and furnished is an indicator of social class. And we'll come to it in a minute as well. Cars and material goods were also a very clear indicator of social class. This is in contrast to the material goods that Aunt Lizzie tells Gar about that she has in America. Okay, so Aunt Lizzie tells her about all the TVs and the aircon and everything that she has. Gar is swayed with the thought of material goods and associates material objects with climbing the social ladder. Now, the question is, why does he believe material goods are associated with climbing the social ladder? Because of Senator Duggan's treatment of him, and because Francis King married the woman he loves, he has a bit of a chip on his shoulder and realises that if he wants to marry someone, or if he wants to marry someone he loves, he must make more money, he must have more material goods in order to create a better impression. Okay, that society has done this to him. And a lot of time you might be asked a question about how characters are influenced by the society in which they live in. And this is one way Gar is influenced. He has changed his attitude. He didn't care about money at the beginning. He's now starting to care about it. And he realises the material goods. And you'll see here, when he sees Kate before he goes, he keeps telling her how much money he's going to make and the material goods he's going to buy. Gar realises that you need money to climb the social ladder in this text. Mentioning how he's going to buy a car is significant as it shows how we relate cars people own to their social status. In The Handmaid's Tale, Alfred said lesser cars for lesser men. And that's very important. The commander had, I think it was called the Whirler, but other men, lesser men, had lesser cars. And even in today's world, we know that people often associate social class or social status with the type of cars people drive. BMs and Mercedes would be an indication of wealth and of being high up on the hierarchy of social class. So, and again, we can go back to Brooklyn. George Sheridan, Nancy believes he's a viable suitor because of his social status. The entire town wanted Eilish to get married to Jim Farrell because it would have offered her security as well. But she decides to marry Tony. So Eilish actually goes against her cultural context. She's not influenced by her cultural context. She goes against it. Okay, family life communication. Okay, the text offers a very negative view of family life, with Gar and SB having a very cold and difficult relationship that seems bereft of love and affection. Okay, so you'll remember the scenes at the kitchen table where SB comes in and Gar Private is able to commentate on the entire thing. He's able to predict everything he says and everything he does. There's actually a moment, I suppose, it's quite dark humour. He's able to predict when he brings off his hat, and he does it in the form of a catwalk. Commentator Marie Celeste is wearing a nifty little number this evening, and he says, "Take off the hat," and he takes off the hat, and he said, "The most obedient father I ever had." So it shows the monotony of life with family life in the home. The dinner table, it's quite tense. It's awkward when they're sitting there. And if you want to think about the scene in Brooklyn where Tony's family are having dinner, and the noise and the laughter and the shouting, even if it's not always good, there's anger. And in fact, it would be better if Gar and SB would just express something. So, but if you think about it, the Italians are known for their expressive nature. Tony's Italian American. Irish people, and I mentioned it at the beginning where Brian Friel says, "To hell with strong, silent men." Irish men did not show their emotions. They did not show their feelings. And we know this because Madge tells us that when Gar's mother died, SB didn't cry. He said nothing. Okay? He didn't, and because Gar says he hasn't said anything, and Madge says he didn't say anything when your mother died either. There's a poignant scene in the play where Madge is talking to SB and he's pretending he's reading the newspaper, and when Madge leaves, he turns the paper up. It has been upside down, and it shows that he's thinking all these things. And I suppose something I would say to students, you would love to know what SB's private is saying. You would love to know, but because of what Gar's saying, we do know, and we all know from our own, what we say isn't always how we feel. And in fact, when we say nothing, it doesn't mean we don't want to say anything. Gar and SB are unable to communicate with one another and keep all their feelings to themselves. Seeing and hearing the voice of Private gives us a perfect insight into what Gar is thinking. We realise that there is love between the two men, but they are just unable to express themselves properly. For example, SB expresses himself a little bit better when he's talking to Madge, and he's talking about when Gar didn't want to go to school because he wanted to help his daddy in the shop. And he mentions about the sailor suit and about how happy he was. And he actually tries to talk to Canon Mick O'Byrne at one point about it, but he shuts him down as well. He doesn't want to talk about it. And again, Brian Friel's highlighting how Irish men did not want to communicate about emotions. Okay, it was way left field. It was something you didn't do. You talked about the weather. You talked about the mart, the price of cattle, the price of sheep. You didn't talk about emotions. Okay, and it has actually led to a society that is emotionally dysfunctional. Okay, and it's only now Irish people, you'll see a very different breed of people in the next generation. In contrast to The Handmaid's Tale, where communication is forbidden, so I suppose there's an irony there that Handmaid's Tale, they're not allowed to communicate. They are allowed to communicate in Philadelphia, but choose not to. Okay, so you can play around with that. It's a very good point. In Brooklyn, think about how close Tony's family are at the dinner table. Ellis's family are close, but it's very reserved. If you think about when Ellis tells her mother about being married and she's going to Brooklyn, she says, "I'll say goodbye now and I'll go to bed." There's that sense that she didn't want to show emotion. She's obviously very upset, but there's something about Irish society and showing emotion, the stiff upper lip, what would normally be associated with British people, but I suppose there's quite a link between Irish and British people in that regard in terms of how we express emotions. Think about the way Tony expresses himself in relation to the way Elis's mother does. Okay, so if you liked the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more English notes. You can also go to endesenglishnotes.com where you'll find junior and leaving certificate English notes. Thank you very much.